Hello, everyone. Welcome to panel discussion number 6 of the Long Weekend of Literature's 2021. This panel is a conversation on performing gender across cultures with Schneeberger from Switzerland and Kareem Khubchandani from India. It will be moderated by Tejaswi Subramaniam of the Gezi family. Tejaswi will introduce the panelists to you. You have already met Tejaswi on track 2 earlier today, and also Chris on track 1 earlier today. I think the new addition to the festival right now is Kareem. Welcome, Kareem. I hope you have a great conversation. Over to you, Tejaswi. And just before we start, I wanted to give some logistical pointers, which is we will actually you can continue conversation till about 8:10. An hour and 10 minutes, and we will keep Amia, my colleague here, and I will help you keep time through the chat, and you can also we request the audiences to leave the questions that you have for the authors and the panelists in the Q&A box. And if you want to chat with us, or if you want the moderator or any of us to like speak about anything that you want to speak about, then you can convey that through the chat box. We will primarily use the Q&A box for the last 20 to 25 minutes of the conversation. So please send us all the questions that you have. It's okay even if the question comes up right now, you can just leave the question in the Q&A box and we'll take them up at the end. And any other conversation, please leave it in the chat box. If there are books that the authors are talking about and you want reference to it, etc., please leave it in the chat box so that we can find out and let you know what it is and answer your questions. Thank you so much, Tejaswi. Over to you right now.
Thanks, Lasya. That sounds wonderfully organized. So yeah, welcome everybody to this panel discussion, which is a part of the Long Weekend of Literature's Festival 2021. The theme of this festival, this edition of the festival, is Belonging Beyond Borders. And the Long Weekend Festival is brought to you by 11 partnering European countries and their cultural institutions, the European Union, EUNIC, and of course, Belong. My name is Tejaswi, and I'm an editor at Gezi Family. I'm also a journalist and researcher who focuses on mental health, public health, and I'm, of course, most interested in queer issues at the heart of all of these discussions. By virtue of being queer myself. The theme of this particular panel is performing gender across cultures. And in a diverse world, we obviously find it imperative to push against rigid borders, be it geographical or social, so that we get the chance to be alive, to be expressive of who we really are as individuals. Gender as a category is a slippery term, it's a slippery slope with no inherent definition, but it is obviously widely pervasive, widely systematized and executed and implemented and performed. What is then gender performativity, and how is this performance affected by different aspects of one's culture and identity? These are some of the conversations that we're going to be having today. In this panel, we will discuss these questions with Kareem and Chris, who have brilliantly explored themes of gender, sexuality, and queerness in their works. I'm going to be introducing Kareem, who is the Mellon Bridge Assistant Professor in Theatre, Dance, and Performance Studies, and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Tufts University. Welcome aboard, Kareem. He's also the author of Ishtail, Accenting Gay Indian Nightlife, which won the 2021 Association for Theatre and Higher Education Outstanding Book Award. And we also have Chris, who goes by the stage name of X, Chris Schneeberger, who was born in Switzerland. And over the years, he has collected texts written in the morning after from underground raves, from life as a political activist, as well as a drag queen. And he he interviews these various spheres of art and narratives in a multitude of forms and identities. For instance, as X Gnome, that's their drag name. That's the name as they perform the drag under. They perform a reading of their award-winning novel Neon Pink and Blue. So welcome, Kareem and Chris. I'm so excited to get this conversation started. And yeah, like we discussed, both of you have one thing in common. Both of your journeys began in New York City. And I'm so curious as to what led you to New York City and how did your journey begin there? Chris, would you like to go first?
Yes. Actually, I didn't dream of going to the US, even not for visiting, but then I had the chance to visit a training in work against racism and anti-Semitism and homophobia, etc. And that was in at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And then later I went to a holiday trip to New York City, and it happened that I met the drag queen that I was watching months before, night and day, on MTV in a Madonna video. And I got invited to my first show, and I went there, and there I met my first boyfriend. Yeah.
And your first boyfriend was also your drag mother of sorts, right?
Yeah, that's how it got started. Right.
How was that? I'm curious. Before we move on to Kareem, I'm very curious as to what that relationship was like. What does a drag mother do for somebody, for their protege, for somebody who's just starting out? Can you hear me? Am I audible?
So sorry, I thought you were asking Kareem.
No, no, I'm asking you. Your
um,
first boyfriend was
the,
also your drag mother, and how was that for you? What does a drag mother really do? How do they introduce? How did he introduce? How did their drag avatar introduce you to the world of drag?
yeah, there are different understandings. I think what is in common that the drag mom is the person who introduced you to drag,
Mm-hmm.
usually by the first time doing makeup or doing it for you. In our case, by falling in love with a man and trying to spend time with him, I was kicked out at home, and so our first drag session was that he cut out fake lashes from golden paper, and then I even don't know with what kind of glue, but we glued them on the face because we didn't have any other resources. And um, in and it shows the other important moment of drag moms, depending on the city and the culture, is many young people get homeless by their coming out, and drag mom can also be the person who helps the younger person to get through in life.
Right.
In my case, I had the chance that it was much more my drag daughters who saved me a couple of times than that I would have fulfilled the motherly role. Yeah.
Do they continue to be your drag mother? Do they continue to be a drag parent? Do you still turn to them?
Well, Hi Tiger is an artist, a Black American artist. She is my, they are my drag mom, and we are our Facebook. We are in touch, but we haven't met for 21 years, I think. Yeah.
Wow.
And
But their
with one
style
of
continues to influence you.
yeah, we enjoy to see from each another from time to time what we are doing in arts, and it's still very inspiring. It's I think there's a level of exchange still going on. And one of my drag daughters, Stila Diamond, she is my company on stage. She plays the piano. And
Right.
Galaxia Cox showed up at many of my shows. The last was the opening of my book. She was a great highlight at the show before dancing. Yeah.
Right. It's beautiful how this, this kind of relationship that happens in a space of performance also translates to, your journey um, in life, off stage as well, in some sense. And we will talk more about that. But before that, let's move to Kareem. Kareem, please tell us about how it was that you found drag, how you found the drag scene when you moved to New York City, and how was it for you watching your first drag performance? How did that affect you? And yeah, how did that move you emotionally?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. And I'm visiting you all from Medford, Massachusetts, and on the east coast of the U.S. And I moved to the U.S. when I was 17 years old to start college from Ghana, West Africa, and I knew I was moving to New York, but what I didn't realize was I was moving to upstate New York. That was 5 hours away from New York City. That was very devastating. But in the summers, I would go to New York and visit my brother who was living there for a little while. And I used his ID and I would go to gay bars. You know, I was just coming out. I was just sort of exploring. And and I had a lot of fun, and there were drag queens at these bars, and I didn't understand what their purpose was, right? I didn't understand why we would stop dancing for this thing to happen until my second summer here, where someone from the South Asian Lesbian Gay Association took me to a party called Desi-licious, and at that party, again, the music stopped and the crowd parted, and uh, a Desi drag queen did Mardala from the movie Devdas, and suddenly things made sense, right? I understood that the way she was sort of performing for us and giving us a gift of bringing film and music to life, music that was, you know, so sort of remarkable, dance that was so iconic, was just really a phenomenal moment for me. It was also a bit terrifying, right? It was my homophobia and transphobia were also at play, and saying like, well, I hope she doesn't pull me in to dance with her, you know,
Yeah.
so it was that like desire and abjection at the same time were happening for me, you know. And then 10 years later, suddenly I'm in Chicago and I'm organizing a queer South Asian party, and I was like, well, it has to be like that one that I went to, right? It has to be, there has to be drag there, and I couldn't find anybody to perform in Chicago, and so I did it for the first time. Never, not, you know, it wasn't my lifelong dream to do it. I didn't identify with it, but it was, you know, so I went to a thrift store, found what I could, to the best of my abilities, did put together some music. It was like Chamma Chamma with MIAs, paper planes. The makeup was very white. I just, you know, think the arts and skills and the choice. I didn't know I could make choices. I just knew I was supposed to like put makeup on my face. All that said, the party kept going, and so I just kept performing for years, and it became a practice, and it became something that I did from something I did reluctantly, something that I really enjoyed doing, something that I taught me a lot about myself, my gender, um, folks around me, and became part of my research practice as well.
Yeah. I love that you performed the Chama Chama. I think that's one of my favorite songs from my childhood. Um, I wanted to ask you, slightly deviating from what I think the agenda, but I'm so curious. I have to bring it up. You had, when we had earlier spoken, you told me about, you told us about how it was such a sensual thing to perform. Like the stage was so close by, right? And it really, you could touch her, you could feel the swirl of her skirt and things like that. Um, how how does drag change with, you know, going online? Like everything's still online, and most parties are still online, performance still online. Do you think drag's the same, or like how is it different, or is it still capable of touching and impacting you the way it happened to you all those years ago when you first watched the live performance?
Um, I mean, it can do different work, you know. So that very first time I performed, when I watched the video, I always laugh because the night of the show, the 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 club owner removed the stage, saying, "Look, I have space to dance," but that meant there was no space for performance. So I performed on a little bench, but in the middle of the show, I fall, and the audience catches me and pushes me back up onto the
Oh,
stage,
nice.
right? And that presence of other people makes the performance, right? It's and people tipping and people screaming and shouting and responding to the song, like that. It is really
For
the
me.
best part of drag, right? And I haven't done drag for a year because performing online was really hard, right? You work very hard in your living room, and at the end of doing a performance, it's just silence, right? But then there are other joys too. There are other pleasures you get of like editing the video, of adding effects, of using projections and other
Yeah,
things that you might be, performing on the couch and like having a set in a way that you may not. So there are like other things that can happen with digital drag. Um, there are people who don't have a lot of access to makeup and costume, but they're using filters to do drag, right?
yeah,
Which I think is really accessible and wonderful. People who can't go out and
yeah,
for a variety of reasons, because of parents, because of age, because of
yeah.
disability, and they're able to both access drag and do drag, right? Through online venues. So, for me, I miss the noise of the club, but I think
Yeah,
digital drag is also serving other purposes different from the club.
yeah, I hear you. Accessibility being one of those, like people with disabilities
Right.
definitely cannot be in a room where there is so much commotion as certain kinds of disabilities. And I'm
Right.
autistic myself, so I know that sometimes it can get really overwhelming how other people react to drag performers, and I just want to be in a safer, quieter space. So, yeah,
Right.
accessibility is definitely some way in which I feel like digital drag is changing things. What about
Yeah.
you, Chris? Have you been performing this past year? Have you performed digitally? And how has the experience been different for you, um, performing live versus performing on a camera for an audience that may or may not be there, that's not really responding in the ways that you used to?
Yeah, I can just say the same thing as Kareem, that it's a complete different setting, but it also has it opened new chances. I think the first video live stream I had 1998, and it was a series going to 1999, and the pictures, they were jumping, the sound was jumping,
Yeah,
and so on. It was just, I thought that people don't know how lucky we all are, that this pandemic happened just in a time when the pictures work and the sound work. And so I had now it's cheaper facilities, and before it was a big thing, and it was all puzzled together because there was no systematic streaming
yeah,
platforms and cameras and blah blah blah. And
yeah.
now you have it, and it's not extra cost usually, and the quality is all right.
Mm,
So actually, I made things I wouldn't have done without the pandemic, and I've learned more about video
yeah,
and working with microphones and so on. I usually I love to fail on stage
mm,
when it's live, because then
yeah,
I always have to find a way, and I usually find a way to deal with it, and the public, yeah, that they can put you back on the bench when you fall down.
yeah, yeah,
But then you're in a video, and this makeup is now recorded, your costume is recorded, so you have
yeah.
more expenses and time and money for all this. You
Mm,
cannot repeat the same text two
mm,
times. It's another productivity, and I'm happy that I got into it, and it, will,
mm.
it was always part, and will be much more part again, but I love the audience and the interaction with the audience.
Yeah, yeah. So you miss it?
Yeah,
Did
in
you
Switzerland, I had now a couple of shows in front of audience. So then I
I'm
really
glad.
felt how I really missed it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm glad.
Can I also add one of the things that has happened with pandemic performance is the ability to perform with people in other countries or to be
Yeah.
on the same bill. There's a show called A Plus in out of New York that is Asian drag, right?
Okay.
And it was primarily Asian American drag, but
Mm,
at some point I got to be a bit on a bill with folks in Thailand and in Canada and in the UK and in um, Latin America, right? Like it can expand the idea of where Asia is,
yeah.
where who is an Asian American or Asian performer. There was also Rangila, which is a Toronto-based South Asian party, held a drag show that had South Asian performers from across the diaspora and subcontinent, like including folks from the Caribbean, South Asians, Indo-Caribbeans, right? Which reorganizes what we understand as South Asian drag. It's not just sort of Bollywood style drag, um, which I thought was really important to disrupt, who we think brown drag
Yeah.
artists are, and
Mm,
so there are these other global configurations that were possible
mm,
through the kind of asynchronicity of digital drag and
mm.
um,
Yeah. Uh, that actually brings me to my next question, Kareem. I was going to ask you about. I was checking out curated Auntie studies, your that you put up online, that platform that you put up online, and I was reading one thing that really particularly caught my eye in Philippines. I think Filipino language to talk about AIDS, they actually use the word titiaida, like Auntie AIDS, right? So like I'm so curious about how the word auntie caught your attention. Like, why did you choose to pick that one word, that identity that is so commonly used in a sort of like in a in a sense of making fun of someone, making like avoiding someone. And I'm also curious if you share my idea that the word auntie and how it's used is like a product of misogyny in itself. It's other these people that you call an auntie, even though they are affected by patriarchy just as much. So yeah, tell us more about why Auntie and how has that shaped your
yeah.
drag identity?
Yeah, I love that you picked up on that video in the Critical Anti-Studies Project. It's an interview with Tita Aida, who is a older Filipina drag queen
Yeah.
who one of the things she talks about is the challenges of aging while trans, right? And not having role models,
Mm,
um, and having to sort of enter a trans future for herself in which as a racial minority in the US without kind of examples, without care. And this is where I think aunties have been systems of care, right? They in collectivity they help raise young people even as they discipline them, right?
yeah.
Um, and so the auntie as a moniker becomes this pejorative. It becomes an insult. It
Mm,
becomes, don't be an. There's a whole set of pranks that you can watch on YouTube of men calling young women auntie in Pakistan and in
mm,
India, and these women
mm,
freak out and like, don't call me auntie, um, and because the auntie is assumed to be old, fat, sort of backward in her politics,
mm,
unfashionable, accented, all of these things. But that's what my drag was like, right? I was performing in saris in a nightclub, and people thought it was kind of funny and improper, and
mm,
sort of started thinking about me as an aunt. I also, at least in the kind of South Asian, North American scene, I'm like one of the older South Asian queens on the scene,
mm.
right? So I am literally auntie. I am the the
Yeah.
older figure around. Um, and so I guess I just leaned into it, right?
Mm,
Because, especially as I age and my friends and siblings have kids,
mm,
I don't want them calling me uncle,
mm,
right? Like that doesn't fit, right? I want to be uncles are like wear gray and walk around slowly, and aunties to me are fabulous and excessive, and I'd rather enjoy that excess than the kind of demure uncle. So auntie has this, has been personal in terms of like um, aging, but it's also been this way of doing drag in to fully capitalize on the messiness of the auntie. I'm not saying she's good, but I'm not saying I'm good either, right? I think that we need all the pieces of her to feel fully realized. Um, yeah, I so it's not trying to rescue the auntie, but to you know be her in her glory and mess. And I have this music video called Sari, in which I talk about myself as an auntie, but there's also another auntie in the video, and we sort of riff off each other. And it's really fun.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. The personality of aunties is definitely more colorful than an uncle. um, Chris, I'm curious, what are your inspirations for like your drag performances, and how is it like? We talked a little about how, as a Swiss German, you have your own political history that has affected you and that has shaped the narrative around gender and where you grew up. And how have you drawn from that in the kind of narratives that you pick for stage as a performer? And yeah.
Yeah, I think when I was a child, there were two figures which were really important. First of all, Josephine Baker, and then Marlene Dietrich. And I adored them. And I was dreaming of visiting Marlene Dietrich in Paris. She was still alive when I was a child. I never met her. And but there are different times and phases in my evolution in drag. Josephine Baker was an idol that I could never reach, as well as Marlene Dietrich. And I got I had a certain resistance. How do I explain this? The first thing is Switzerland has an image that doesn't really show what Switzerland is or was. The women in Switzerland didn't have the right to vote till 1991. Every man was a soldier. Every soldier got a gun at home, and the law didn't know rape in marriage. So this was a complete military dictatorship system, making every man a accomplice of military. And so there's one thing is in this world of armed men, and I don't know, there are no studies about it, but I had the feeling that the Swiss women for a long time covered their femininity in order to protect themselves, to protect their bodies from aggression and rape and violence. And so as a child in a more industrial suburban ghetto surrounding, I was missing this celebrated femininity. That's on the one hand side. On the other hand side, I don't want to repeat the image of femininity, that there are some numbers and curves you need to have, and then you are or you aren't. I'm looking for figures which are more tomboy, more punky, more non-binary, finally. What also is the critique from other drags to my shows. There's some say, well, that's not drag. Yeah. But well, that's okay. Right? There are different definitions of drag, and that's the power of drag, that you occupy symbols and codes which are not meant for you. because you're in the wrong body in many, many different ways, or because you're this makeup was designed for light skin, or you take things that were not planned to be for you, and you make a fashion show without having any designer. You just empower yourself to be a model just for yourself. So this is, I think this is the play where as a Swiss and white person, I'm always a little bit in still in finding the way. You know, I will not dance like Josephine Baker, and I will not sing like Marlene Dietrich. Where am I? Even though it's still a masquerade, the mask, it's always looking for the mask that speaks about you too.
I think I also adore Josephine Baker and Marlene Dietrich, if I'm pronouncing their name correctly. Josephine Baker, I think I remember watching the snippet of Les Savages and reading this commentary about how there was this exoticization of Black bodies that she, made fun of in her performance. And I never really thought of as drag culture because that's not the association that I made. But now that you pointed it out, it fits perfectly. And even Marlene Dietrich, I watched one of her movies where I think she's seducing the headmaster, he's a prude of sorts. And all the boys go to watch her and where she's performing, but the headmaster is finally going to watch her, and then he falls in love with her. And I love how she just embodies this playfulness in that role. It's not seen as a very femme fatale role, which is so serious and heavy, which has also got its own, space. But I love how she just plays with this desire that she's brought up in this person who earlier wasn't very interested in her existence. So and I also hear you when you say that there are non-binary identities that can be part of drag, but somehow they don't seem to be considered drag. And I'm curious as to who are these people who kind of get to say what's drag according to you or according to what you've seen?
Who are the people who dare to say what is drag?
Yeah, not dare, but like who what gives them that authority? Is it a certain kind of celebrity? Is it a certain kind of fame, experience? What is that?
Well, it's a little bit the question, and when I was a young drag queen, there were the first gender studies coming, and the first students doing gender study works to send in school. And then I was asked to be part of such a work in the 90s, and then I was kicked out of the work because I wasn't drag, or not enough drag. So a woman decided on the basis of studies from other people's knowledge that what I do. This was a strange moment. Then it's a strange moment that RuPaul is dominating the image at the moment. But look where he's coming from, where she's coming from, and it's a great story of success, and of course. That's the media system. The success makes the dominating image. The dominated image is now the new level you have to reach. That's another discomfort, and having someone from really outside telling me what I am and what I'm not. So
just to speak to RuPaul as well, RuPaul's early career was punky, non-binary drag that had jock straps and American football gear, along with heavy makeup and feathers in her hair, and part of her sort of move into hyper glamorous drag was that she was being told she wasn't doing drag. and that she wasn't and that as a black drag queen, she wasn't she had to just perform harder than everybody else, right, to achieve femininity. And so she's become this arbiter of, she's the one who's been keeping trans women out of drag spaces by not inviting them onto her show until very, very recently. But she also has this history of like living
Being
inside of
oppressed because of it.
the authenticity politics of what drag is, right? That it is actually a crossing of gender as opposed to a manipulation and celebration and messing up of gender. And so I love the way that you think about drag, Chris. I think that it gives more people permission to do it. When we don't see it as this enforcement of binaries or this reproduction of binaries, as opposed to doing what you can with what you've got as well.
Yeah. I'm curious, like when you go on stage, you have this identity, right? And sure, there is the costume, maybe you're wearing heels and all of that. But when you walk off stage, does some of that identity seep into your personality off stage, Kareem? And how has that felt? And did you notice that initially, and now has it kind of become more part of you and it's more conscious?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, it's so interesting that the audiences are so easy to prime for performance. So, the MC says your favorite Desi drag Auntie, Lahore, Rajasthan. I don't even have to do Auntie for that. Like the second that they put that together, suddenly they're seeing Auntie, even if I'm, not doing it, right? They're just ways that the audience is so willing to play with the fantasy, right? Drag spaces are just really magical in that way. They're spaces of imagination and invention between audience and performers, and that's why I really love them. But there's some very like practical material things where when I was looking for jewelry for jewelry that I could afford to sort of sparkle and shine on stage, I found these stores in Chicago. That's where I started doing drag. And I was like, oh, everything is so cheap and fabulous. And so I just started buying stuff, not just for Lahore, but for myself, or wearing her things. Like it just, so it gave me permission to shop in a different aisle, and in that process, right, I was like, oh, I just never went into the women's sections of clothing stores because I wasn't supposed to, because of embarrassment and shame and whatnot. And now shopping for Lahore has led me down. I was like, okay, let me buy more fake fur and let me wear more sequins every day, and especially shoes. Like, I mean, men's clothing is homophobic, right? It is just like it's just, it's like navy and khaki and forest green and beige, right? Like the permission that capitalism gives male-bodied folks to perform anything other than neutral, right, is actually quite minimal. So yeah, I like look over there and shop over there, and that's just something that doing drag has done for me. Sorry about that. And then I would say also, things like, you can see on here that I have any pronouns, right? That I've come to welcome gender fluidity and expression through doing drag, or to not be attached to maleness and masculinity by doing drag, and that has been actually really valuable to sort of shift my positionality and the way I see myself, and the kind of stakes of performing gender have shifted by performing in over the last 10 years.
I hear that, and like you said, this permission to shop in the aisle that that is not meant for you, for your gender. I remember when I was a kid, I used to get a lot of shirts that my grandfather used to wear, but not anymore because he was not working, and kurtas and things like that. And I would be actively told not to wear them because they would not suit my silhouette. But that was very freeing for me. I could just look boxy. Even today, I love oversized boxy shirts. So there is this idea that aunties or women, if you have those curves, you need to dress them up a certain way. And then there is this idea that when you don't have them as someone assigned male at birth, you need to, I don't know, stick to that. Yeah, I really like that you said that is homophobic.
And
I just design.
And I've learned like my drag mother taught me how to pad my hips so that I would fit a gown, right? And
Yeah,
because it's cut in a certain way, and therefore it can sit for it to sit on my body the way that it was cut, right? It's just also sort of it. I started understanding clothing and fashion more, which was very nice, right? Like I've always loved clothing, but like drag became an exercise in understanding cuts and shapes and how
yeah,
things react to light and makeup, right? And
yeah,
makeup and skin, knowing the undertones of your skin. So you just have to know your body well,
very well.
um, in order to make choices about it, right?
Yeah,
It's not about executing proper masculinity or femininity. It's about understanding your body in order to make choices about what you want to put on stage. And
yeah,
that's also been important.
yeah. In terms of makeup, has it been easy for you to find makeup that suits your skin tone? And how has the politics of that played out for you?
So the first time the one time I did a drag competition, the judges kept saying, well, we can't see your lips. And they kept saying that we can't see your contour. And until there were rotating judges through the competition, and until there was a black drag queen on the panel, she's like, "Let me talk to you after the show," and she's like, you don't need white powder on your face. You need banana powder, which is like a more yellow powder." She's like, you need to put a base under your lipstick for it to show.
Oh,
But also that basic reds are going to just blend into my skin. So wearing a red lip needs a heavy liner for it to actually show. So these are just things that, I mean, it's literally art class, right?
yeah,
Um,
understand.
but it's also different in that like skin takes up color and reflects back color in different ways from paper as well. So some of these things are only known by in within subcultures, within like
Yeah,
artists of color offering each
yeah,
other suggestions and skills. And now there are some like fabulous makeup brands that are made for darker skin,
yeah.
like Juvia's place that I'm obsessed with. I like just keep buying their palettes, but like because they show up and like I look really good, so I wear them.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. What about you, Chris? How has the journey for you been in terms of finding costumes and makeup and figuring out how you want to play it up on stage? And also, like, how do you use makeup? Like you said, you like to keep it like looking gender fluid, the non-binary identity of your performances. How do you make sure that that doesn't get lost or that merges seamlessly with what costumes and makeup you pick to go on stage with?
I think I have to relate to something I said before. One of the big pleasures and works and also pains of drag is that I realized how militarized my body was by the gymnastic hours in schools and the sort of behavior this men had towards us and towards male body and the behavior they expected from us, because when you were good in school, the only thing lacking was also being good in sports. And then you had a military career, which was always related to your professional career till the women entered society as equal members. And so for me, it's yeah, there is allowance to go to shop, but First of all, it was an allowance to figure out what would be my movements if I wouldn't have been trained, or if I wouldn't have reacted on this training. You know, finally it's your reaction on what people put on your body, and so for a long time, the first thing wasn't for me that I wanted to be a woman, but for sure I didn't want to be a man in this suprematistic, misogynic society. That was the first message, I think. And as I don't know if these are waves of hormones. I know that I'm very stable in changing, and there are months I feel more female, there are months I feel more male. That was very confusing till I figured out, oh, that's very regular actually. It's always this and then that, and then I know the next time decisions I take are a little bit different. I look a little bit different to this, but after a while I figured out it's not. It's another form of stability, not the one they ask
equilibrium
in the medical panels. But and now in the novel, it's actually the character, the drag character, that finally takes the voice and says, why are you ashamed of me? You know, you make shows, and the moment your show is finished, you run to the bathroom and you wash your face and you take off your drag and you go back to be the homeboy. And I think that was because I can flee to a male look, and I can also copy male behavior from Italian, Yugoslavian, whatever kind of friends and cultures. I'm very quick in adapting these codes. I had also a longer time to realize that how much self-hatred and how much misogyny is behind this fear of being seen feminine, or being addressed feminine, or maybe even called feminine. You know, this that was a big terror inside, that drag was one of the performance to get through and get out.
I mean, Chris, I really identify with you saying that you would rush out after a performance, take off the makeup, and I would do the same thing, because I wanted to enter the space and be attractive to the audience who was just watching me, right? I was like, I want to be like you now, not like her, right? Being myself. And really that there was a shift at some point where I was like, no, I want to spend the night in drag, walking through the crowd and people loving me for this, right? And so that, and also, as you talked about the militarization of the Swiss body, just thinking about the militarization of the gay body as well, or the queer body, in like the obsession with masculinity, with men in uniform, with you know, when I started coming out and seeing queer imagery, specifically things like Tom of Finland imagery, that has so much like hypermuscular, hypermasculine. You know, it's what I thought I was supposed to be performing, right? And it's why I, like, as soon as I got out of drag, as soon as I finished a show, I wanted to get out of drag and fit back into that kind of body. And so sometimes it's not just sort of the straight state that's producing it, but it's actually queer cultures that are producing this kind of valorization of militarism and the police state as sexy and as attractive and as oppositional to effeminacy and beauty. And so just, Chris, I'm just saying your comments are just resonating in different ways, but in really productive ways for me. So thank you for that.
Okay. Something I wanted to ask you, Kareem. I grew up in parts of South India that were rural, and I have actually grown up watching drag. Chris, sorry, you were going to say something?
No, it's okay.
Okay. So I've grown up watching drag, but it was not known as drag, right? There are cultures in which you cross dress, or especially people of certain oppressed castes, oppressed communities come out and they perform as part of religious ceremonies and stuff. And obviously, like even in Kashmir, I think a lot of trans people perform at the wedding ceremonies. They have a really vital role to play. But outside of it, they are discarded. Outside of it, they are still a very marginalized community. So, how do you think the decolonization, or rather the colonization process, has played into this kind of dichotomy in their existence in mainstream society? And what does decolonization look like, or how is it playing out for you in drag culture that is not drag performance? You know what I mean?
I get what you mean, but I think that we are now in the present day working with drag culture that is drag culture, and it is the exclusion of those folks, right? So when in India we think that we program a show that that spends thousands of dollars to bring in RuPaul's Drag Race performers to do drag,
Yeah,
and does not invite does not invite hijras, does not
yeah,
invite
the local trans
Aravani,
community. Yeah,
Jogapas, right? Like, is not who are skilled artists who are playing with gender, right?
and they've been
They
doing it
may,
traditionally.
yeah, right. And are really skilled in their performance of gender.
Yeah,
Um, uh, in so many different categories of performance, of folk and classical, right? But
in a
our
sense,
inability,
Kathakali is also drag, right? Kathakali.
right, our inability to see that drag is some version of drag is here, right? Or to
Yeah.
expand our framework of drag, our idea that we have to look for drag in the West, and cannot find transgressive, queer, messy kinds of gender formations amongst us, right? So it's a way of seeing. It's an epistemological problem that we
Yeah.
cannot. And so that's what I think like colonialism does, is to say, oh, the proper thing is over there.
Mm.
The proper gender formation that makes up drag, i.e., crossing from one gender to another, is from over there.
Yeah.
Is from the metropole, or from the West, or from the neo-colonial form. And I think that we're missing out on opportunities to have a beautiful show.
Yeah.
I was watching I think a live stream of the Bangalore Queer Film Festival when there was a Jogapa performance that was music and dance, and I was like, in my faggotiest self, was like, this is the queerest thing I've ever seen. I'm having so much fun watching this live stream, right? And I could hear the audience like really loving it as well. And I was like, why is this not on all our stages at all queer
Yeah.
events?
Yeah.
And then, I also think about at, if we think about the Pride Parade in the US, and the way that drag artists become the sort of image, the public image of Pride, in which they are doing the visibility work. If in the South Asian context, in an Indian context, it's hijras and trans women who are doing that visibility work, right? They're dancing with the Dalit drummers at the march, and and they're the ones being photographed, right? They're doing that labor for us, for all of us to like come into visibility.
Exist. Yeah.
But again, we don't invite them onto stages. We say like, do the visibility work, be part of
Yeah.
the march, but actually compensating them for their creative labor, we don't often do. And I think that that's another way in which we've like failed to see what else can be drag, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because South Asian drag artists and hijra performers are performing to some of the same songs, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But some are artists, and some are cultural workers, because we've created these distinctions about who does what. and it can be really frustrating. But so I think to answer your question, I think a decolonial framework is one that can explode the ways that we have made categories and uh, pigeonholed people into different kinds of performance practices to say that they are not like each other.
I want to tie this back to what Chris also mentioned about how knowledge producing structures also kind of informed what is drag and what is sorry, I got a little distracted by something, but what is drag, what is a drag queen and what are they supposed to look like, and how new gender identities are not part of that kind of a culture. So I'm curious, both of you have a background in academia, right? And both of you are in, at least Kareem, you're still quite involved with academia right now. So what role does academia really have to play? I feel that academia is doing more harm than good when it comes to gender. I want to stay out of it. I feel like academia kind of looks to the past, looks for evidence, whereas gender is all about finding it within yourself and not looking for, like, I would never know that I feel transgender if I kept looking outside of myself for clues and cues, right? I personally, that's my personal experience. So what role do you think academia plays in gender studies and in drag studies and things related to the subject? And yeah, first Kareem.
So wanted to make sure you see the message in the chat.
I did. Yeah,
Okay.
I was just gonna get to that. Okay, let me just do that. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that Lorenza, you're in the audience. Your session will start in 5 minutes on the other track. We have resent the link, the relevant link to the other track to you in your email. So please use that. Coming back. Yes, Kareem. Thank you so much for that. Yeah.
I mean, I'm in the academy. I've been in it for 10 years now. I mean, I think there's phenomenal research going on about what gender can be, how we can rethink our relationship to bodies and animals and land and place. That is in conversation with Indigenous thinkers and in conversation with drag practitioners. But I think that there's a way in which the academy privatizes knowledge, right? So it looks like it's behind because we don't have access to the free version of the journal article till 5 years after it's been published, right? And it takes, and it, what I think is productive and unproductive about the academy is that it takes 4 to 8 years for an essay to be published, right? That it has to be researched and written and properly cited, and then has to go out for peer review, which can be 2 years, right? So from the moment you started the research to the moment it comes out, what is really lovely about it is that it's really rigorous thought, but it's also quote unquote behind, right? But differently from, I think, journalism, there's much more historical context, and there's and academic publishing has to be in conversation with other things, right? So you understand where it's placed in the world. It's not just like, here's important information, but here's important information to this line of thought, right? So there's an intellectual history to that. So it's slow, which is why, and it's expensive because it's always behind a fucking paywall. Excuse my French. But I think that, when I think that there are some really lovely academics who are doing really important work to decolonize language and gender and the idea of the human, but sometimes that is slow to enter the world. The last thing I'll say also is something like, I think we criticize Judith Butler and Gender Trouble for being inaccessible or difficult to read, but when Gender Trouble came out, queer folks were reading it and were understanding it outside of the academy, right? But it's academics who are like, oh, this is too hard to read. And I don't think we give everyday folks the credit for actually being able to read difficult philosophical reading and make sense of it and interpret it. So and I think that I think we don't give folks enough credit for how smart they are to, and because they think you can
outside
do
of academia.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I'm going to take something from what Kareem said and ask you about it, Chris. Kareem talked about how there is rigor in academia, and that's, worth appreciating. But how is that contrasting? How is that kind of clashing with playfulness in, drag, for instance? Can rigor really ever absorb the playfulness that drag brings out in gender?
The playfulness is the word you said, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Can
academia ever really wrap its head around the playfulness?
I don't know if I really have a position for this question, because when I grew up already with RuPaul being quoted in serious discussions on drag and gender. So it even though I was mostly underground and far away from any academic discussions, it was never a decision between the two things. One thing, yeah, maybe this was a little bit a strange image I gave with this example of this young female student in gender questions. This gender studies are really important, and they really opened a lot, and they were accessible and gave how do you say that, a certain consciousness for what you do and what you are by doing this. It's the post-colonial studies. It's basically the feminist studies. That there is a lot of work. I think from the very beginning on in this modern world where we try to reflect every phenomena also in academic discourses. And I think it depends how the teacher is. It depends on your professor. I would be afraid in Kareem's case. And some years ago, a drag queen someone who's doing drag wouldn't have been professor. So we're living this intercourse between discourse and the dance floor.
Yeah, I love that. An intercourse between discourse and the dance floor. I really like that. Moving on, we have some questions from the audience. So, okay, somebody has asked, I'm very curious about neopronouns used in non-English languages, especially for people whose native language is not English. Do different languages tend to create their own neopronouns that fit better with that language? Or do the neopronouns from English just carry over? Or do they somehow exist independent of language? Maybe, Chris, you can answer that in terms of like German and other languages that you know.
Yeah, I was, when we had the discussion this afternoon, I was pointing out that I grew up in a region where the female and the male pronoun is the same. So people laughed at me many times, and they didn't realize why. I didn't get it. And I learned by school and by especially in Zurich, that also Swiss German has this differentiation. So actually, I'm still wondering if we could go back to some possibilities within our language. If I should Argovia, make everything a little bit like in Arga, where I grew up, so that it's een man en vrouw, tak, it's the same. Like in English. It's very exciting right now. We have people who choose now to create new pronouns that they take from the word mensch. They take the E, the N, and the S. It's ens. It's close to ein. So it's practical. But we will see what will arrive. Maybe the English versions, depending on age and your bubble. It's all in a movement right now. And what is really surprising is we have now, I don't know, 40 years of work on language in Switzerland. We had all this very ugly ways to call Italians, foreigners, black people. There was a lot of work on the language, and the same generation that was fighting for those things which are basic political correctness now, so that we don't realize anymore it's political correctness. This generation is now shocked by the gender discussion. I don't know, maybe it's just the next generation has to take on and give it on to the next. But it was a shocking experience in the last months in Switzerland to see that the people who really rule the discourse, they're not there. I mean, we can say some of them die soon, some of them, or maybe not.
Do you think they got cancelled?
Sorry?
Do you think they got cancelled? Like
But the funny thing is that those people who profited from the system up to now, they talk about cancel culture, but their culture is canceling of everybody else.
Yeah.
So the cancel culture are these guys, and we figured out that in Switzerland, in the big media houses, we have 40 years of work, and they're not there yet. They're really not there yet. I'm really wondering how these stockholders are going on to support people who are not on time. They're not in the discourse, and they even fight it with arguments which are far out of their own professionality. That was really a little bit a nasty show the last months. And so I'm not quite sure if this fight is not just like most fights, a constant fight, and we are not done, not today and not tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thanks for that. What do you think, Kareem? How do you feel about new pronouns? And how do you think languages interact with, this discussion in English? And how do you think we can go back to mining languages that we know are native languages for these sort of references?
I mean, I think that we need as many options as possible, right? And we need to, and we should always be giving ourselves options. So, I mean, I have a student who's Chinese, who when they introduce themselves say that they use he, they, or ta, right? As a way of signaling that they think of their gender in other language terms, right? So it's not, but for them it's not a English versus Chinese distinction, but it's like here are all these possibilities, right? That you can think of me through, right? And I mean, I think pronouns are not necessarily identities; they're ways of people referring to you, right? They're
I'm thinking about you,
right? But it doesn't necessarily fix you as something, right? So I think that so I don't know. I think that more capacious approaches to pronouns in all languages are really important. What frustrates me are language purists who say, well, this is our grammar. and who forget that grammar has been shifting and
Yeah.
vocabulary has been shifting and our, yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I just had a thought, sorry, that actually, you know, the Bible, that is this big propaganda thing of fake news on gender, and it's like they feel when we correct or criticize men in power, they feel canceled. I mean, what the fuck? You can't be canceled. You're in charge. You're in power.
Yeah.
The same thing, like in German, we have this the gender discussion, and to gender is they when they say this, they actually talk about that we want to disgender language, and the ones who actually gender is the traditional language after the Bible, and so yeah, it's surprising how far they get from their own sciences and their own rationality in the moment that we try to ask what could be new gender forms. We're still asking, you know, there's no mainstreaming and there's no, we don't, we want to open that question. We never want to put someone into the next box, but they're turning this discourse around against the, against the emancipative progress that they will profit as white men in charge. They will profit of it anyway, you know.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kareem.
Kareem, you were saying.
No, I think I was just going around about it at that point, so Chris came to my rescue, so thanks.
Okay.
Very nice.
Somebody has a question for Kareem. When you talk about the connotations of auntie versus uncle, auntie being more lively as opposed to uncle, etc., how do we choose for ourselves the words that we feel comfortable with without adding weight to the stereotypes of each role? Obviously, not all aunties are lively and not all uncles are boring. How do we contend with our choices potentially pushing the role of auntie and uncle deeper into their respective box?
This is a very great question, and I think, you know, I'm choosing those pronouns based on how those identities based on how I've moved through the world and who, you know, what I've seen, right? That means that by asking people to think of me as auntie, I'm inviting all the other stereotypes or you know, there's risk. I'm not actually saying it's liberating. I'm not saying that it frees me from anything, but I'm saying I'm willing to take on all the risks that come with that figure, that stereotype, that archetype, that and I think, you know, that all language is burdened by history, and burdened by discourse, and but we have to. I mean, this is when thinking about everyday life as artistry, this is when we say, okay, I'm going to make a choice, right? And I'm going to play with it and I'm going to see how it works. And I'm going to put it on stage, and on stage being talking to friends even, right? So thinking about these things, thinking about everyday life as aesthetic choice making becomes this way of having a little bit of fun, taking some risks, bearing the kind of joys and pleasures and violences that may come with it, right? So, you know, I again, I'm to repeat myself, I'm not saying it's freeing. I'm saying it's something I'm willing to play with, and that's how I make choices. As you know, how do we, as this person is asking. Yeah, and you know, just thinking about the previous question and this one right now, there's a friend who says, I use any pronouns, please switch them up, right? So, you know, if you want to be uncle and auntie, you can be like, I'm uncle today, or I'm uncle or auntie. What do you feel like? How do you want to think of me, right? So you give people the option to interpret you, right?
Yeah.
But I think that really thinking through performance and aesthetics has been this way of saying, okay, it doesn't just have to be on stage. I can bring my body into the world on my own,
Yeah.
on new terms.
Mm.
I don't know if they're my terms, but on new terms more often.
Yeah, yeah. Also, I feel like this idea of polarization is a factor of new media, because that polarization happens when somebody sees an artifact on new media and then extrapolates a certain idea about it. But like you said, the daily life interaction is obviously more lived than artified, if I may use that word. How do you feel about that, Chris? I'm going to quickly ask you for your opinion and thoughts on this as well.
I was a little bit traveling far with my thoughts, because just when I listened to Kareem, I thought it just happened. Just lately, it happened that somebody called me she, and I didn't even realize it, and that a lover called me she, and I didn't get an aggressive impulse as I used to have before. So it's a long for me. It's a long way to really live what I try to make possible. Yeah.
I hear you, and I actually relate quite a bit to that. Another question about for Kareem is about when you spoke about padding your hips to fit into a gown. Is there a danger of drag reinforcing stereotypes of masculinity and femininity, such as the curvaceous woman or a manly man?
Also a very great question. The things that we're always producing gender, right? So if I was wearing the gown, not thinking about hip padding, but if I wasn't padding my breasts, for example, right? And if I'm just wearing a flat, have a vest with a gown, I'm reproducing the the kind of skinny Calvin Klein model of the 90s, right? There's no way of getting out of it, right? If I'm producing the curvy gender, or I'm producing flat chested femininity, right? Or the sort of straight skinny body. I think that the act of putting the dress on alone is as much of a choice as putting on pads. Right. So that's one piece of it. The other is that the gown is cut to fit a particular kind of body, right? If I wanted it to actually fit tightly to my body, I would have to re-sew it and recut it, and I don't know how to do all of those things. I don't have the resources to do them. And so actually the easier way to make it look like the designer wanted it to look like is to pad it out, right? And make sure that it I'm filling out the gown in the shape. So in some sense, gender and body shape is being predetermined for us by clothing, right? But if I'm in India, I can get things made to fit my body shape without having to pad things. But to create flares and to create shapes with my body through dress. But in the US, where I'm buying things off the rack, they're already cut to a particular shape, and can I fit that? And is there a joy and fantasy to fitting that, right?
Yeah.
Don't I deserve to feel like a Kardashian for a few minutes,
Yeah.
And also I learn a lot about, people treat me very differently when I have hips, right? And I'm learning a lot about how people understand my body. And people are horrified by the fact that I have hips and breasts and hairy arms and chest, right? They're like, this doesn't go together, right? So there's a way in which it's like actually a very safe move to put on put on a gown or a sari without any of those paddings, because then what they're gonna see is you're a boy in a dress, you're a hairy boy in a dress, and you're and they can sort of dismiss me, right? So in certain ways. So I don't know. I mean, those are some of the ways that I'm thinking about those questions.
Chris, I know you have something to say on this, and you must. How do you feel about navigating costume construction and constructs of gender?
Yeah, I'm very grateful about this, what Kareem said. It's as he is put into a certain direction of body image, I'm more this heroin chic kind of body. And yeah, we didn't decide about this. So playing with it doesn't mean that you acknowledge and support the classical media images. But there's a certain point, like I think it's not only to accept my femininity is a big work. It's also a big work to accept my white trash, and that I'm that the elegance of Josephine Baker is far away from me and how I grew up, and to find then there is a David Bowie, and they're all these white kids who played with the same thing, also not coming from the aristocrats of Europe, and not coming from the bourgeoisie that you grow up by knowing how to touch the spoon and how long your sleeves are. I never learned that. Too late. I won't learn it anymore. I think it's always you have to go further. You can only go further with your self-image when you accept part of what you already got.
That's interesting.
I'm just thinking off of what Chris is saying, and what you were saying also about like I seek to fail. There's a kind of joy that comes out of wearing a really badly tied sari and like offending all the aunties. And then there's another kind of joy that comes with wearing the perfectly pleated sari, and like feeling like, yes, I got it. Like it's a different type of FU, right? And so I think both of those, right, like the badly fitted gown and the perfectly fitted gown are also, they're both these possibilities, right? There's something that we learn from failure, and there's something that we learn from success,
getting
right?
it right.
Yeah. But I think it's giving yourself a moment to take that lesson away of like, how do I feel when it does fit or doesn't fit, right? It's the takeaway as opposed to the actual fact that it does or doesn't fit, right?
Chris, how do you feel?
Yeah, I just saw the comment of someone, and why is it only the drag queen's responsibility to be completely iconoclastic and do all the work of breaking gender norms? And I think that's the point where we're at right now. I think we I will not overcome my skinny body, for example. I will not overcome all the images, but as playing with it, we show that there are always other possibilities. And the most important is we live relational. So my gender varies in relation to the people I'm in a relation with. And probably their gender varies also in relation to me. Drag is the playground which is marked what we are playing about, but actually do it every day. Everybody does it every day.
Yeah.
And Chris, I'm just thinking about your invocation of Marlene Dietrich and Josephine Baker. That drag also has a way of paying homage to other folks who have done the work I've done iconoclastic work, right? It positions itself, I think, in legacies of people who've been messing with gender and race for much longer than we have in this singular moment, right? And so if we think about all the divas and gender rebels that we cite when we perform, I think that we're also paying homage to say, like, there are people outside of drag who are doing these kind of rupturing things. I mean, this is why folks like Tina Turner and Whitney Houston and Josephine Baker and Marlene Dietrich and Joan Crawford are constantly cited, right, by drag artists. Kate Bush, right? Like, just there are all these figures who are not drag artists who are doing the similar kind of gender rupturing work. And then we haven't talked about drag kings and drag monsters and drag animals. And there's my favorite is JoJo Baby in Chicago, who came to a nightclub as a fireplace, right? Like drag objects, right? There's all these other ways of like redoing the body and therefore disturbing what we might think of as gender or gender binaries. And I think it's worth remembering those kinds of artistries as well.
Yeah. I was recently watching the show Scenes from a Marriage, and I think in the first episode the researchers asking them about their self-definition. They have to share something that is core. And both of them introduce themselves and say, I'm a man and I'm a woman. And it struck me, if somebody asked me that question, I would not be talking about my gender. I wouldn't probably say I'm a girl or I'm a woman or I'm a man. I would talk about something in a very different context. And that's how I realized that, that's how gender becomes so crucial to someone's performance of their identity in the real world, in the world out there. But someone who is neuroqueer or queer, genderqueer, we don't really think of it in that sense. Chris, were you going to say something?
No. Or maybe yes. Yeah. What I think, at least in Switzerland, we are in a strange moment of the queer movement is that we have now gay marriage. Yes. With great support of wide part of the population. It took quite a bit longer than in other countries, but now it's really supported by the most people, what is wonderful. But people think of it as a progress, and I think it's a backlash, because we need much better adapted modern roles of relationship, and so that will also influence gender and gender identity, which varies over lifetime. And if you're part of a family that has little kids, or if you're part of a family that everybody's more or less the same age, or you're part of a group where you have people who are really aging already, I hope that this backlash, as I say, in gay marriages, that we use this as as Nietzsche says, you go back in order to jump further. And
to leap forward.
Yeah, because I think it's really not done. It's not done with gay marriage. It's not done to give the National Swiss Prize to a queer author. It's not done with all this what we are enjoying, but that's it's about the beginning.
I hear you. And I feel like on that note, we are also just beginning to start this conversation, but like we're so over time and I must wrap up. Last has already flagged that for me. Thank you so much for this conversation. I loved chatting with you, Kareem and Chris. There's no other way I would have wanted to spend this Saturday evening. So thank you for being such lovely company. And see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kareem, for being here. This was an amazing conversation. Personally, got to learn a lot.